Hi, folks. You're with Tacitus today. Tacitus today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio live stream. Please listen to this presentation as you would a radio broadcast. In this essay, I'd like to talk about the Australian federal election, which took place yesterday. Now, certainly based on the earlier results, it seems that the pro-globalist, the super pro-globalist, I mean, they only talk in World Economic Forum talking points. They have no policies, original policies at all. It's all World Economic Forum, globalization, mantra, talking points, utterances, propaganda, and so on. So that party, the super pro-globalist party, with turbocharged mass immigration, where I can go around the train system in downtown Sydney, Australia, and I'm the only white person on the carriage. The fanatical commitment to net zero and high energy costs, where we've seen energy costs, almost quadruple over the last few years, where constantly the newspapers and the media are running stories endlessly about all white people are Nazis and fascists and swastika waving and so on, all of this sort of stuff. This has been an endless sort of theme, and yet it's those people. Our standard of living has gone through the floor. The rents, the cost of rents have increased substantially since these pro-globalists have been in government. Yet, in spite of all that, they allegedly or supposedly they receive a bigger parliamentary, congressional. I mean, these guys are the equivalent of the Democrats in the United States. They receive a bigger majority in the equivalent of a Congress, the Australian Parliament. Now, I'm sort of surprised by that, because a government as unpopular as they were for failure to deliver, for constantly delivering lower and lower living standards and higher costs and higher rents and higher mortgages and so on, in spite of delivering everything that reduces and lowers our standard of living, in spite of that, they not only get re-elected, but elected with an substantially increased majority from the looks of it. So how on earth could this happen? How is it possible? Now, the subterfuge and the treachery that these guys use to say, well, no, we only bring in skilled migrants, skills that the economy needs. We only do that. No, we don't bring in mass skill as well. Now, it just so happens on a list of skills, it includes floor sweepers, dishwashers, burger flippers, nail painters, beautician salons, and people to do the donkey work in old retirement homes, this sort of thing. Those are the skills. Those are the occupations they claim skills. So anyway, how did it all happen? Well, the primary opposition party, who would be more or less the equivalent of a sort of a centre-left Republican type party, but they were unimpressive in the extreme. I thought they fluffed, a number of things. They were pretty much globalisation light themselves, having been taken over by the globalists anyway. In fact, they were the party in government, these guys, when the globalisation kicked off, and they were very much the beginning of mass migration in Australia was delivered by the equivalent in Australia, at least to the Republican Party. So they're hardly against globalisation. When they had a prime minister, that same party, who was very concerned about the cost of living increases and didn't want to do the net zero because it would impact the cost of living, and I think they just got rid of the guy. They just threw him out. It didn't matter. He was elected by the people, all this sort of thing. Too bad, you're out. And they put in a guy who was very much committed to net zero and mass migration and so on. So anyway, so they were hardly better. So I'm not suggesting that the other party would have, put a big stop to mass migration. They wouldn't. They wouldn't have stopped net zero. So so really they would have scaled back the mass migration a little bit, or claimed they would. They may have just reclassified migrants in other new and inventive classifications in order to pretend they were cutting back, but I'm not sure they would have. There was a few sort of at the periphery of the ideology sort of scale they were talking about being more moderate on, but really it would have been, it was difficult to tell the difference between the two of them in policies. One was a little bit more aggressively on board with the globalist project, and the other a little bit less on board with the globalist project, but still on board with it. Now, the leader of the the equivalent of the Republican, the leader of the LNP, as they call them in Australia, the leader of that guy party was quite unimpressive, and he had an unfortunate look. He looked like the Phantom of the Opera unmasked or something. He had a rather unfortunate sort of look about him, and so on. I don't think that worked very well. He was, I thought, ineffective in delivering the message, as were the people around him. But there were some other factors, and I just want to go through them here. The area that we live in is a electoral district that is pretty close. It could have gone either way, and clearly the party machine of the pro-globalist party was concerned about it. Now, they seem to have vastly more resources than the other political parties. I'm not talking about they've just got a bit more, and they got vastly more resources. So every week in the lead up to the election, every week there was a door knocking campaign. From young volunteers. There's a door knocking campaign with this is how you vote for us, and we believe in we believe in looking after people, and I mean all lies and all talking point bullshit and propaganda, but nonetheless they had people on the street door knocking, delivering every week. Every week somebody would come around to the house, and I was doing some work on the car, and I was underneath the car, and I was up on jacks, and I was and I think spanners in hand, wrenches in hand, doing some work, and then there was this voice. I looked. There's a guy, a young guy. I mean, he wants to. He wants to engage me in conversation about politics. Hey, buddy, I'm busy, all right? So on the street, like outside the shopping malls and the big grocery stores, and down the main street, they had people handing out leaflets and brochures and flyers and all this sort of thing. The local candidate was out pressing the flesh and rubbing shoulders and all this sort of thing. So he was putting himself out there. I thought he's a bit of a fucking idiot, actually, but I did need him. But whereas none of the other parties even came close, that didn't get door knocked once by any other party. There were no brochures and leaflets, flyers that appeared in the letterbox from the other parties. So the ground game, and when I say the ground game, I don't just mean they were more active, the pro-globalist party. They had vastly more resources available. Vastly. It costs a lot of money to do all that printing, and I'm sure they were volunteers going around, but just a short conversation with the volunteers was these weren't volunteers. These were people employed and paid by NGOs who then loaned those people to the pro-globalist political party to go and do the foot slogging and pound the sidewalks and put the brochures in, do the door knocking and this sort of thing. Now, in an area like we live in, which has got a lot of national park and that sort of thing, it takes a lot of walking to cover not that many houses. So, the blocks of land are bigger and they're all single-story freestanding, all this sort of thing. So it takes a lot of walking around to cover not many doors. I mean, you could spend, you'd be lucky to cover 100 sort of doors and conversations in the best part of a day. So you need a lot of people on the street. And I was surprised, just as I was driving around, they had whole teams and groups of people organised, and they had team leaders, they had small buses to bus them around. This is a very intensely organised network. I drove past one bus where they were all there with their t-shirts on and everything and the hats, and they were getting handed food and water. So these people were being driven around. They were given food, given water, and again, they were all employees of NGOs. They were being paid by NGOs. The NGOs were paying for all this sort of stuff, but they were just loaning it all to the pro-globalist party. I mean, is that ever going to be hit in the media? Let's suppose they weren't NGOs. Where does the money come from to do that? Why does only the party in government have all these resources available, but no other party does? The other parties, to what extent they had a ground game at all, they were relying completely on volunteers. These were not paid people. These were not employees of NGOs being paid to be there and bussed in and shipped in. And I spoke to some of them. They were there, driving their own vehicles, using their own petroleum and using their own, everything, buying themselves lunch. And, if they wanted to bring water, have a drink, they had to bring something with them. Nothing was supplied for them. They had no, ground game infrastructure at all. So, and they were, less impressive people. I think when I say impressive, I mean the young and eager sort of crowd that the globalist party had. That's obviously a set piece maneuver there. They've gone to the NGOs. We want young and keen and eager and da 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 da. Not that these young people knew anything. They didn't. Again, they could only spout a few talking points, and that was the end of it. But the other parties had nothing to compare. There was nobody door knocking. There was young, keen, and eager people. And I met one from one political party. There's one young guy who really didn't even know what day it was. I mean, he seemed pleasant enough and polite and everything, but he didn't even know what day it was. He had nothing to hand out or nothing to talk about. And outside of one grocery store was an older lady, probably in her late 50s, overweight and with very thick glasses on there, standing there looking rather pitiful, really. And she was it. She was there. She was there sort of spruiking the message, looking rather pathetic, I thought. But, well done to her for putting the time in, and that's great. But that's when you got those sort of people doing the street, you're not winning over the crowd. So the difference in ground game was absolutely monumental, and the resources that again the pro-globalist party had dwarfed all the others combined by 3 or 4 to 1. That's the extent of it. Now you would expect that would have some impact on the voting patterns, but given the pro-globalist party had been responsible for, everyone was complaining about, responsible for the brutal and savage reduction in people's standard of living, you would think that they would be punished at the polls, but instead they actually improved their situation. And just like in Canada, the leader of the Conservative Party, he ended up looked like he's lost his seat, his electoral district. I mean, it's possible in a long shot he might just hang on, but it's not looking good. So he's going to lose his seat, and the party's going to lose, 25 odd electoral districts. So they're getting absolutely hammered. Some of the other parties also got absolutely hammered as well. The only hope is that some of the minor parties, the anti-globalist parties, might increase their majority in the Senate, but that's the only hope now. So a stunning result in many ways. But again, I want to highlight, why did the pro-globalist party have vastly more resources and access to a vast NGO network that the other parties couldn't even come close to competing with? You've been with Tacitus today, your Pushback channel, and thank you for listening.